A lot of people believed it could happen, perhaps even more believed it should happen, but fewest of all believed it would happen. And yet, here we are. The Green Bay Packers are moving on from Joe Barry as their defensive coordinator. We are live on YouTube, reacting live to it. That's what you do when you're live. You react live to it on today's Locked On Packers.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. And Wednesday started with the reporting from Tom Pelissero that the Green Bay Packers have moved on from defensive coordinator Joe Barry. And one thing to quickly clean up that we have not mentioned on the show, but was reported by The Athletic, is that there was not just a situation to move on from the contract. Like, it was not, the contract was up, they could just not bring him back. That he was under contract for 2024. That was the report from The Athletic. We will get more information, I'm sure, at some point about the details of that. It's not relevant. He's not going to be the coordinator of this defense for the Green Bay Packers. And there was no, as part of this, and we're reacting in real time right now on YouTube, there was no, oh, he's going to kick upstairs or he's going to be the senior defensive assistant. That was something that we speculated on the show could happen precisely because Matt LaFleur believed that that Joe Barry was a good coach, a good guy. And that's all well and good, but that doesn't win you football games. I've said this before and I will say it again. It is show business, not show friends. And the NFL is show business, baby. That's what it is. And ultimately, I think that's what makes this a little surprising is Matt LaFleur has shown a loyalty to his coaches, to his guys, to his players. And this was the correct moment for this to happen. You could certainly argue that last year was a better moment, but the idea that this was not a done deal, that this would happen, I think speaks to the perception of Matt LaFleur as a loyal coach and perhaps an organization that is not always willing to make the difficult choices. Yesterday, the Milwaukee Bucks fired a head coach who was 30-13 and not a Bucks fan bat an eye because they were like, yeah, this is the right call. And this is the same situation with Joe Barry now. This was the right call. That doesn't mean that it wasn't made with consternation or they weren't close to bringing him back. We don't know those details. But this was an easy one. In the Joe Barry era, the defense, so since 2021, where they rank in the aggregate, 24th in EPA per play defensively, 30th in success rate, 31st in EPA per rush, and 17th in EPA per dropback. And that discrepancy is the thing that I want to highlight here, because if you're going to play light boxes and let teams have some level of run success, you don't want to just let them run. Like that's not how defenses work. You still want to be gap sound and you still want to have players who can play top down, safeties who can fit the run and all those things. But if you're going to make those sacrifices, no big plays and put a lid on everything. And by the way, they did that to terrific success for the most part against the best teams that they played this season, the best offenses that they played this season, the Lions, the Chiefs, the Cowboys, and the 49ers, until that final drive when they just played way too passive. And that has been a hallmark of this Green Bay Packers defense under Joe Barry, the passivity. So if you're going to give up the run, you're going to be 31st in EPA per rush. First of all, don't do that. See if you can make it 24th instead of 31st. Just be normal run-of-the-mill subpar. But you have to be better than EPA, 7th in EPA per dropback. You have to be more than just an average passing defense overall if you're going to give up the run. You can't do both, which is ultimately what happened too many times with this team. Now, yesterday, we talked about the urgency. Actually, today now. I talked about it yesterday, but the show came out today on Wednesday. The urgency, if you're listening to this on audio, it's yesterday. Anyway, let's not time travel. The urgency to win right now. This is a reflection of that urgency because last year, going into the year, I think there was at least a framework of an argument to be made rather than start from whole cloth defensively in a year where you've got a new quarterback and all of these new offensive pieces. Prioritize the continuity, hope that with all the defensive talent that you have and the infrastructure and the institutional knowledge that you can take a little bit of a jump. You can go from the low 20s to the low teens on defense, and that would be the stabilizing force of your team while Jordan Love and the offense figured it out. Of course, we know, having experienced it, that is the opposite of what happened. That the defense ultimately was the biggest problem with this team over the course of the season, was the biggest problem with the team again on Saturday night, because the Packers had a lead in the fourth quarter of that game and Green Bay could not get enough stops. Green Bay just could not get enough stops. And this goes back to the original hire. The mistake was the original miss, much like the Milwaukee Bucks hiring Adrian Griffin. That was the original sin. It wasn't moving on from Mike Pettin, who over the course of his Packers career, just objectively a better defensive coordinator than Joe Barry. Joe Barry had some good performances in some big games, which is excellent, and you want that. But when you can't beat the bad teams, that's the problem. The system was just not adaptable enough. And we're going to talk about the traits before we get into the list, which we will do as well. We want to talk about the traits of the kind of coaches that the Packers would be smart to target here. And they needed to do this now. This is something I put out on Twitter the other day. They need to do this now. Like Ryan Nielsen already has a new job. That would have been someone I would have wanted in Green Bay. So as these coaches are finding homes, as these coordinators, because it's not just, you find a new head coach and you think of that when you think of that turnover, but there have been teams around that have head coaches in place that need new defensive coordinators. The Bears, they kept Matt Eberflus, but they haven't had an actual defensive coordinator since September. So these jobs, that pool of candidates is going to shrink the longer you wait. This could not wait. It had to happen now for this team and this organization as they try and attack a title. But that does raise questions about how far afield from this scheme do you want to go? And I think that is an interesting conversation here. Do you want to pick from the poisoned Fangio tree? Like, could you call a Brandon Staley and hope that as a defensive coordinator, he's just better suited? I think that is a philosophical question that right now we don't have the answer to. But I want to talk about that and the things that Green Bay would be smart to look for when it comes to a new defensive coordinator. We're going to talk about that in just a second here on Locked On Packers. Today's live reaction to Joe Barry being fired, brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle to level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, You're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only and exclusions do apply. eBay guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. And thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, Locked On Sports Today. Here for you, covering 24/7 the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On. That's me. Plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Before we get to names, I think it's important to establish criteria. And this is what the Green Bay Packers are going to do as well. It's not just about the guy. This is vital. Hire the coach, not the scheme. And this was ultimately why Joe Barry failed, because they hired Joe Barry, who has no track record as a successful coach, as a defensive coordinator, just doesn't. But they hired him to run a defense that he was only passingly familiar with. It was Brandon Staley's defense that they wanted to bring in. And we took this as an opportunity to say, well, this means more opportunities for Matt LaFleur. And I think ultimately that happened, but only because it got so bad with Joe Barry that Matt LaFleur had to step in. And this is exactly what happened with Mike Pettin. Is Matt LaFleur ultimately did not trust Mike Pettin to do his job. And once the head coach has to come in and start holding your hand, that gets really problematic. It's why I said at the time, rather than do that, just fire him. And not that I'm never gleeful. That's why I'm not like on here celebrating people getting fired. Sucks. I've been laid off. It sucks. So I don't want to turn this into a celebration by any means, but it needed to happen at the time so that you're not taking away from the time that as a head coach you can spend with your offensive meeting rooms or with your special teams meeting room. And God knows they need the help on that too. This needs to go beyond just Joe Barry, by the way. Like, you can't replace Mike Pettin with Joe Barry, keep the whole staff the same, and then fire Joe Barry and still keep the whole staff the same. Like, it just is not going to work. You have to evolve and grow more than that. And that leads me to this point. The number one thing I want in a defensive coach is adaptability. Adaptability. I don't want you to run the Vic Fangio tree scheme. I want you to run the best defense for the team that you have. And a defense that hopefully is versatile enough that they can be adaptable enough week to week to modify the game plan. You don't have to be, a cover 3 team one week and a man coverage team the other week. Like, that's just not realistic. You have the players that you have, right? And so you can only be so adaptive. You're a quarters team. You're not going to suddenly become, this other blitz heavy, crazy Brian Flores team. Like, that's just, it's not how this works. Okay. So adaptability to me is the number one thing, which means hiring a coach, not a system. I don't want to hear, oh, they're from this tree, that tree, this tree, that tree. I don't care with defense. I need you to be adaptable. Now, I need to know what you stand for. Not to make this all about what happened with the Bucs, but one of the big problems with the Bucs was, what do they stand for? What are they good at? We didn't know. Now, we knew with Joe Barry, and that was the problem. That was a defensive style that was so passive. I want a defense that's going to dictate terms to the offense. That's what Mike McDonald's defense does. That's what Brian Flores, for all the faults that roster has. That's what Brian Flores does. He had to play a wacko version of it because the talent just wasn't very good. You have to be able to adapt to what you do, but also stay aggressive. If your whole defensive ideology and an identity is built on preventing a team from doing something rather than forcing a team to do something. Like it's really, when you think about it, the same idea. Like put the lid on the team, put the lid on the offense. That's the same idea as force them to check the ball down, right? Same basic idea, because what you're saying is if you're not going to allow anything deep, I need everything underneath. But there's a difference in philosophy, in mindset, from we don't want to get beat deep to make them throw it underneath. Rally and tackle. This front is really, really good. Really, really good. Kenny Clark, Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, Devontae Wyatt, Carl Brooks, Lucas Van Ness, and whatever draft pick they add, because they're going to add draft picks to this team. So you're going to be able to have a defense where your front can get home on its own. You don't have to play some crazy blitz style. It's not about blitzing. It's not how much you press. It's how much ideologically are you dictating terms? Are you trying to confuse what the other team is doing? That's the essential part of this. And I have to say that as I look at the list of potential candidates, this team, I understand that they want to go win right now, and we've talked about the pressure that's on them to do that. Stay away from retread head coaches. Because generally speaking, especially multi-time, like I've heard people say Ron Rivera. For what? For what? When was the last time Ron Rivera's team had good defenses? When was the last time you watched that team and thought, yeah, that's good. That's good stuff. Like, they had Jack Del Rio as their defensive coordinator and they had to fire him. That route does not make sense to me. Now, I actually do think Brandon Staley will get a look here. I frankly don't think it's the worst thing in the world. It's not who I would pick, but I would understand it. I think he's probably a guy who's much more better suited to being in the lab with his guys and trying to figure that part of it out. I also think that college right now is where the innovation is, offensively and defensively, frankly. And I would explore that route. I don't know why there aren't more teams looking to the college ranks defensively, because they have found better answers to dealing with these spread offenses, to not allowing explosive plays, to finding ways to be able to stop the run while also playing too high coverages if they need to. I mean, everyone's trying to copy the Alabama defense for a reason. It's because it's really good against these spread offenses. It also helps to have really good talent. But that's the part to me where I want a coach who I think is going to innovate, who's going to iterate, who's going to constantly grow and evolve with what the team is week to week. Oh, you got a couple injured corners? Okay, that means the coverages have to change this way. Oh, you've got a specific player, one player who's going to beat you this week. This has to be the plan. So that means to me, I don't want these old, like someone like, there's a lot of Wink Martindale in the chat. Wink Martindale does one thing. Now, he plays an aggressive style, to be sure. He will blitz you. He will play man coverage. I'm sure a lot of the players on this team would love to play that way. But that defense, there's a reason the Ravens, one of the best organizations in football, was like, thanks, but no thanks. We're kind of done with that. And they moved to a new kind of coach. And the Giants, it's not like the Giants were lighting the world on fire. Now, the Packers have much better talent, but that defense just did what they did. I understand it is a preferable approach to what the Packers were doing. It fits the dictate terms, play aggressive style that I'm looking for here. But it doesn't fit the iteration, the creativity. And that to me is just so much more important than I want a guy who's going to blitz. I want a guy who's going to play man coverage. Like, no, hire the coach, not the scheme. I'm going to say that so many times over the next couple days and next couple weeks as they go through this process, because I would expect they have some people in mind. I would think that they want to get involved here. And so the process, they probably have some coaches that are going to be involved in other coaching searches. So this is going to take some time, but I think this is a good groundwork, a good framework here to frame the final discussion, which we're going to talk about some actual names, some people who I think make sense for the Green Bay Packers. We're going to talk about it in just a second on Locked On Packers. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. I would have probably put this at like minus 250, minus 300 that this was going to happen. But I did not see FanDuel odds for firing Joe Barry. They may have FanDuel odds for who's going to be the next coach. Probably not up at this point. The NFL regular season is wrapping up and there's still time. Sorry, the playoffs are wrapping up and there's still time to get in on the action with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. Futures, I know it takes a while to get that satisfaction of being right, but man, I killed it with the futures this year. And that's one of the, all season, I'm just watch that ticket. And when I had the Packers to win the Super Bowl, I got crazy odds. I think it was like $50 to win $14.50. And they had that fourth quarter lead. I was like, I started to have some thoughts. I started to mentally spend that money a little bit. Live same game parlays, find bets in the new Explore Hub. And same game parlays are really fun. They're a really fun way to watch a game. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. And thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. So, names to keep an eye on here. Let's start with the guy who didn't get the job the last time. The Packers, by all accounts, wanted Jim Leonhard. And there is going to be a lot of hand-wringing and a lot of like, oh, fans only want Jim Leonhard because he was at Wisconsin. Wrong. Jim Leonhard was a below average athlete, inside 5'8", 4'6", 40 guy. Should not have been an NFL player, but was incredibly smart and instinctive. He was a playmaker. He maximized his physical gifts, and he played for Rex Ryan, Mike Pettin. So it would have been a very smart transition from Mike Pettin to Jim Leonhard. That made perfect sense. But more than that, he took guys at Wisconsin who were 2- and 3-star recruits, and he created a top 10 defense. They play aggressive. They play downhill. He developed all kinds of talent while he was there. Guys like TJ Edwards, who are unique body types, but he found a way to make them all work together. They were disciplined, but aggressive. That is the platonic ideal. That is what you want as a defensive coordinator. You want to play aggressive, but you want to play with discipline. One of the big problems with Brian Flores' defense is it's so aggressive that at times it's easy to get undisciplined. And sometimes it's just like so aggressive that it's impossible to be disciplined because it's just too easy to break the rules of the defense when you've got guys trying to go from the line of scrimmage, sprinting back to cover half the field, as the half field safety. Like some of that stuff, you're going to put yourself in some bad positions. This was the guy that Matt LaFleur wanted. So don't act like this is just some made up thing that is wish casting by Wisconsin Packer fans. This was the guy that Matt LaFleur wanted. It didn't work out. He's a quality control coach at Illinois. You have to make the call. You have to make that call. He would still be at or near the top of the list, in my estimation. Now, you want to stay in the Big Ten? coach for an NFL coach, Jase Minter. It is the Mike McDonald. If you want the Mike McDonald who's not Mike McDonald, it's Jase Minter. He's 40 years old. Coaches for Jim Harbaugh. Now, maybe he goes with Jim Harbaugh if he gets the Chargers job, for example. But he's a former Baltimore coach. Coached for the Ravens in 19 and 20. The DB's coach. Have to imagine guys like Jair Alexander would love someone like Jase Minter. He is, and I think about this often. Les Snead, and this is Jordan Rodriguez reporting. Les Snead told Sean McVay when he hired Brandon Staley, go find your Sean McVay. Go find your Sean McVay. And he got Brandon Staley, and it worked. Brandon Staley was a disaster in LA as the head coach, but as a defensive coordinator, he like brought the Fangio, single-handedly brought the Fangio tree back in vogue in the NFL. Like, let's not give him short shrift for what happened there. This is, I think, that kind of thing for Matt LaFleur. You have to go find your Matt LaFleur. And Jase Minter, Jim Leonard as well, but I think Jim Leonard has more heat. Jase Minter is that kind of guy for all the same reasons. Glenn Schumann, the defensive coordinator at Georgia, they already got Eric Stokes, Quay Walker, Devontae Wyatt. He already knows half the starting defense practically. Who knows? Maybe they'll draft another Georgia player this year. But that is a defense that we heard from the Georgia players. When you talk to scouts, that Georgia defense is more complex than what the Packers were running in Green Bay. Like, I believe it was Devontae Wyatt who said that. So that is one of those, like, they have the blue chip talent, all that stuff. But that's a name. You want a college coach who understands how to stop these spread offenses. That team plays so aggressively, so downhill. They have clearly defined roles. Everyone knows what they're doing. They play on a string. Watching them play zone coverage, and they play plenty of man, but when they play zone, they are on a string. It is so fun to watch them play defense. And it's the kind of guy, clearly he knows how to identify talent. You see guys get better. Eric Stokes got better at Georgia. Devontae Wyatt got better at Georgia. Trayvon Walker got better. Jalen Carter. You know, these guys are like high-end blue chip talent, but everyone in the NFL is that. You can make them better. I think that's part of a prerequisite here. That is a name certainly to keep an eye on. Now, two names that people have thrown out there that I want to address as we finish up. The one is a hard no, and the one is a tentative yes. The first is Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel was Matt LaFleur's head coach in Tennessee. Matt LaFleur was a finalist to be the head coach in Tennessee. Mike Vrabel got the job. They hired Matt LaFleur. That just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And it just doesn't seem like that is something that, number one, makes sense. But number two, what evidence do we have that Mike Vrabel is like a great defensive coach? What evidence is there? He played for Bill Belichick. He was on a lot of really good defenses. He is a culture setter, CEO type of head coach. But what is the evidence that he's going to come in and turn your defense by X's and O's around? I just don't see it. And to be a coach who is hiring an offensive coordinator who was a finalist for your job, and then you leave, and now that guy is a head coach, and you get fired, and you're going to come in and work for him? That just doesn't work. That just doesn't work. The last name that I do think can work, Al Harris. Now, a lot of reasons for question here. Is it just because he's a former Packers corner? No, but that helps. The questions are going to be, can you hire a defensive coach on a staff with a scheme that the Packers just torched? Well, wasn't Al Harris' scheme? And if you go back and look, we don't know what Al Harris would want to run. Apparently, he's not doing a lot of scheme work in Dallas. A lot of it is technique, which is great. But Al Harris played for Jim Johnson in Philadelphia, one of the greats, was a defensive coach I long coveted in Green Bay. Al Harris was like getting the best case scenario. Al Harris played for Dom Capers. Al Harris played for Steve Spagnuolo. Dan Quinn is a cover 3 coach who became a man coverage coach. I think the version of defense we would get from Al Harris would be much closer to what the Chiefs do in Kansas City. Although he coached in Kansas City for the previous defensive coordinator. But Al Harris was an aggressive press corner who talked absolute gobs of garbage. He was such a fun player. He is the kind of guy that would be aggressive. Can he call a defense? Can you take that kind of risk? If you think he's a really smart coach and you think he can be adaptable and you think that your players would like him, give him a shot. I think he's further down this list for me. It's why we talked about him last, because it would be nice to have someone who has called a defense. I don't know that you can be so out of left field with this that you're just going to say, nah, I don't know. If you even like this, Al Harris could be the Adrian Griffin hire where it's just clear he can't do it because he's never done it. Or he could be the Brendan Staley in LA. We don't know. And we can't just throw out former Packers. We can't just be like, hey, Leroy Butler, come do this. Leroy Butler has not been in the league for 20 years. It's just, it's not how this works. You can't take that kind of, love Leroy Butler, my guy. But don't just throw out his name because he's a former Packers defensive back. Al Harris has paid his dues in the coaching ranks. He would not be just like a nepotism, cronyism, former Packers hire. He has earned the opportunity to go be a defensive coordinator somewhere. I think he could make sense in Green Bay. That being said, Jim Leonhard remains the top of my list. The former head coaches, Mike Vrabel, Wink Martindale, I don't think they fit this team. I don't think they fit this timeline. I don't think they fit this culture. Someone young who's going to energize this group, come in and play aggressive, but fundamentally sound defense. That is what you want. That is what you want. I want Matt LaFleur to go hire his Matt LaFleur. And if he can do that, this team can be as good as they want to be because the talent, we know what the talent looks like on that side of the ball. I'm seeing Norm Parker in the chat from Iowa. I mean, okay. Honestly, okay. Let's see. I don't know that we can say definitively he's better than Jim Leonhard. I think that it makes sense to go back to Jim Leonhard if that was who you thought was the right guy. And one name we haven't mentioned that we probably should have mentioned is Ejiro Evero. He was the other finalist. He's getting head coaching opportunities. I think the problem, if it's a problem, is he's such a desired coach that if he coaches well next year, you're going to lose him. He's going to be a head coach. This is the second coaching cycle where he's gotten head coaching opportunities. And so I just feel like it'd be nice to get someone who's probably not going to go immediately be a head coach somewhere else, but you also can't control that kind of stuff. You have to go get the best coach you can possibly hire. I hope it's not a retread. Moving on from Joe Barry is good. You don't have to hit a home run for the defense to be much better next year. You just have to be a little better. And I think they can be a lot better. All right. Coming up at the end of the week, I have something really special for you. We're going to talk about the defensive coordinator stuff too, but we're also going to talk about the business of football from a player perspective. And so I have Robert Greene, who helps Rashawn Gary run RG Sports on the show to talk about name, image, and likeness and player empowerment and contract stuff. It's going to be a different kind of show. And so at least with a different kind of content, we'll make sure we're up to date on all the latest defensive coordinator stuff as well. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Packers. On Facebook, we're back doing stuff on Facebook. We got videos posted on Facebook. We're doing stuff. We're on Instagram. Go follow us on Instagram. We got Instagram videos going. It's new year, new us. We got the social media stuff blowing it out. Let's go. Anywhere you can find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers. And anytime you want to come hang out with us live, I told you we'd be live. There's 700 of you right now watching this live. We can do more live stuff. When they hire a new defensive coordinator, we'll go live. We're going to have a lot of fun this offseason. I just dove into NFL draft stuff, so we're going to start that stuff going. Mock Draft Monday, back on Monday. By popular demand. By popular demand, Mock Draft Monday coming on Monday, so you can stay locked on Packers.